Good afternoon and very warm welcome to all the esteemed panelists and participants. Livelihoods India is a national initiative of access development services aimed at supporting, informing, and influencing policy, focusing best practices and addressing key challenges and issues faced by the livelihoods of the poor, including small and marginal farmers. Given the restrictions on physical assembly due to COVID-19, the Livelihoods India initiative has decided to organize a series of webinars on themes that are relevant to the livelihoods sector over the next few months. For the second webinar in this series, the theme is FPOs and new market opportunities. In the past decade, the FPO movement has gained significant momentum and, in fact, has shifted the narrative of Indian agriculture from increasing production to value-based enterprises and empowering the farmers through market-driven initiatives and building inclusive value chains. The government has also been a big advocate of FPOs to achieve farmers' welfare and supporting their efforts in doubling the farmers' income. In a boost to the FPO movement, the government at its last budget announced formation of 10,000 new FPOs over the next 5 years. Clearly, the COVID outbreak has exposed the vulnerabilities of our agri and food supply chain. It also brought to the fore the role many FPOs could play in times of disruptions, helps the government further recognize their criticality in linking the small farmers with agri and food markets. The discussions today will analyze the experiences of the FPO promotion system and the market challenges that the FPOs face and deliberate on the probable solutions. The conversation will also elaborate on the emerging opportunities with the promulgation of the ordinance on agri market reforms, interstate trade in agricultural commodities, providing a regulatory framework for contract farming and amending the Essential Commodities Act, including the role of the corporates in establishing robust markets for the FPOs and their constituent farmer members. Before I introduce our speakers for today's webinar, here are a few, important announcements for the participants. This webinar is being recorded and you will get a copy of the video recording to send to your email ID for wider circulation. The video and audio will be muted for all participants to enable the speakers present without interruption. However, we invite your comments and questions to be submitted via the Q&A chat box on your screen at any time during the webinar. Finally, in case the webinar gets hacked, we will terminate the discussion immediately and reschedule it for a later date. We have a very esteemed panel today representing a cross-section of important stakeholders engaged in building the FPO ecosystem. We're extremely privileged to have on the panel Mr. G.R. Chintala. Mr. Chintala is the chairman of NABARD. Previously, he was managing director of NAFTINS, a subsidiary of NABARD, and before the vice president at Agribusiness Finance Limited, Hyderabad, and director at the Bankers Institute of Rural Development, Lucknow. We are also joined today by Mr. P.K. Swain. Mr. Swain is the Joint Secretary, cum Agriculture Marketing Advisor with the Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farmers Welfare, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India, and has been instrumental in the launch of the scheme for formation and promotion of 10,000 FPOs and is responsible for its implementation. We also have with us Dr. Purvi Mehta. Dr. Mehta is the Asia lead for agriculture at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has been closely associated with several agriculture and nutrition policy initiatives in India, Southeast Asia, and Africa, and serves on several committees and advisory bodies. The fourth speaker on the panel today is Professor Shambhu Prasad. Professor Prasad works at the Institute of Rural Management, Anand, and has been a member of the expert group of SFSC to recommend the guidelines for promotion of FPOs. The webinar will be moderated by Mr. S. Sivakumar. Mr. Sivakumar is the group head of Agri and IT business at ITC Limited, India, and is a member of the Corporate Management Committee. He also oversees the company's social investments. Mr. Sivakumar has served on the board of NABARD Private Sector Committee on CJIAR and even Global Compact's core advisory group to develop sustainable agriculture business principles, among other organizations. It is our privilege that Mr. Sivakumar has been associated with the Livelihoods India initiative for several years now. We are proud to announce that we have over 1,300 registrations today, and I now hand over to Mr. Sivakumar to moderate the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. And let me add my own words of welcome to all the esteemed panelists as well as all the participants this afternoon. Now, theoretically, FPOs are the best solution to get the power of scale to the small farmers who are so common in India. Now, it's nearly a 15-year-old subject, but at the end of years of effort, we only have a few islands of successes. There are some FPOs which have really excelled well beyond many large business corporations and are doing a great job in terms of scale of operations, as well as the core purpose of enhancing the incomes of the farmers. But a large majority of nearly 7,000 FPOs that exist in India are still struggling for survival. Now, over the years, many studies have said that they have either not attained scale, they are not market-oriented, or they are undercapitalized, there's not enough governance capacity, and so on and so forth, as to what has now made many of the FPOs of these 7,000 still not delivering on the true potential of this FPO as a mechanism. Factoring all of this, we now are looking at a fairly optimistic scenario going forward, because in what I would call an FPO 2.0, we have very recently the new guidelines that have been announced for taking the FPO agenda forward, where in order to get scale, there is the idea of clusters. In order to make them more market-oriented, there is also an opening up of cluster-based business organizations that have been brought in. The aspects of undercapitalization have been recognized to increase the corpus of the equity grant fund, as well as the credit guarantee scheme is also now expanded. So many of these factors that have been considered as obstacles so far have been understood and have been factored into these new guidelines. So that's the context in which we are discussing this today. And along with these guidelines, as Ram has already mentioned, we also have seen an accelerated reform in the last couple of months on the agriculture sector in general, whether it is agricultural marketing related regulations, or the new funds that got created in agriculture and allied spaces, both for infrastructure as well as for micro food enterprises. I think there is a larger ecosystem that can also get created in making FPOs 2.0 a success. So let's understand what are the challenges, how do we make it happen, as part of the initial remarks from the various panelists. Thereafter, we will take questions to engage on the subject a little bit more. And for a subject like this, we couldn't have asked for a better panel. In Mr. P.K. Swain, we have a very passionate person who was the architect of these guidelines. I've known the many midnight oil that he has burnt in making this true, and the kind of consultation that went into it. And we have Mr. Chintala, who is at the apex of the apex organization, which is involved in implementation of the FPO, and out of even the existing 7,000, they have done the largest. And there are many other elements that they can orchestrate in this ecosystem. We have Professor Shambhu Prasad, who has researched this subject and quite widely, and he brought in his multidisciplinary capabilities to understand this subject, and therefore we'll have some thoughts from him on what next. And Dr. Puri Mehta with her global perspectives and experience, having contributed to shaping policy around the subject of agriculture in many countries, I think can get us a good understanding of the market dimension. So I think we couldn't have asked for a better panel. And without a further ado, let me actually start with Professor Shambhu Prasad and ask him, with the help of all the research that he has done, and more recently a survey that they also conducted among the various FPOs and farmers about these new guidelines as well. And what was the successes telling us from the past, and what are the limitations that we can also make use of in making this FPO 2.0 successful, and more particularly focus on the capacity building of FPOs, and share his opening remarks. And I'll request him to share in about 10-12 minutes, and then we'll go around with other panelists. Professor Shambhu Prasad.
Thanks a lot, Shiv Kumar, for the introduction and also setting the stage. Thanks to Axis for raising this important connection between FPOs and the markets. I think we've seen a large amount of change in the last 10 years or so. And this shift from a productivity-centric mode, where we were tending to focus a lot on improving the productivity, which is not necessarily translates into increased farm incomes in all cases. Therefore, the government has renamed the Agriculture Department as one of including the farm incomes part. And a very critical element of it is the kind of issues that farmers are facing with the markets, as the markets are increasingly getting global and more complex in some sense. So first, I think the recent changes that have come about in the last few months indicates the intent of the government to engage with markets more seriously, something that's been tried in the past intermittently, but with probably much less success. I would suggest that it opens up possibilities for farmers and its organizations. And I would tend to look at it as a necessary condition, but not sufficient to try and bring about the changes. Some have referred to these changes as the 1991 moment in agriculture. And I think it's interesting to see that around 1990s was where IRMA had actually done this very interesting study on cooperatives at a time when it was felt that cooperatives weren't delivering as much. The numbers of new cooperatives had decreased, and the work by Professor Tushar Shah and others brought out what are the design elements that makes cooperatives succeed and those that fail. And I think a few elements that we would look at is the member centrality of whether the institutions are able to keep member centrality for the members. And the second is whether they also have domain centrality in the business they are. If we were to look at the same situation today, especially in the formation of farmer producer organizations and largely farmer producer companies that have been enabled partly through the change in the companies law. So we have a period of 2002 to 2010 where things started kind of gradually increasing. And I think through the thrust in early 2011-12 and much more in 2014 onwards, we've seen a big growth in the number of farmer producer organizations. Estimate is about 8,000 of them that were set up till about 2019. Now, what we do realize from a recent study by the Azim Premji University, 80% of these organizations are nascent organizations, less than 3 years old. And the financial health of these are not necessarily encouraging. Nearly half of them are having a paid up capital of less than rupees 1 lakh. Out of the 20 farmer producer companies which have a paid up capital of over 10 lakhs or so, dairy farmer producer companies are much more. Many of these FPOs seem to lack business acumen and expertise. Governance is still an issue. They have exposure of greater risk to producers. Having chosen this, some of the FPOs are ending up paying huge fines because they will be treated on the same terms as a Reliance or an ITC or any other. So I think compliance issue for these producer institutions is quite large. So I think these are some of the concerns that are there. So we are at the thrust of trying to see what exactly might work in today's time and to try and see what kinds of design principles could possibly be incorporated to make a difference in today's time. So what we clearly understand, while milk producer companies, again, with the kind of support that has been there to the National Dairy Services or NDS, they have actually gone to scale with significant size, whereas most of the other FPOs have been struggling to get 1,000 members and therefore a limitation in the kind of capital that they can raise as well. So I would suggest that in terms of going forward, we have to first recognize that there are some lessons that need to be learned from these 8,000 FPOs, etc. And I think one of the positive things of these new guidelines is to look at a longer time frame of 5 years instead of the earlier 3 years. I think many of these institutions took a while to get set up, and after that, the support from the promoting institutions went away. Now we have a milestone-based, support which can go beyond 3 years and at least up to 5 years. And our empirical case studies of many FPOs indicate that probably promoting institutions need to be this organization for much longer, because we do not, unlike the dairy sector revolution, where we had an institution like NDDB, which could take up this at a central level, provide the HR required, institutions like IRMA providing, the professional manpower that can take this up. We don't seem to have a similar kind of larger ecosystem. So in some sense, the failure of the existing FPOs relate to the question of how do we make this ecosystem, and also the importance, if they have to be member-owned institutions, how do we actually build the capacities of these organizations? And I think a lot of innovation has happened in recent years in terms of trying to ensure that these organizations become much more capable as they go along. A few specific suggestions one would like to make in terms of how we could look at this in forward. I don't think it's a realistic assumption that any of these FPOs can reach the same size and scale as, say, some superstars like Sahyadri, which are much better equipped to deal with global market forces. But I think the key point in terms of engaging with the markets, which I'd like to suggest, the first thing is that we cannot talk about greater engagement with markets unless we have robust institutions at the grassroots level. And I think the initial part of building up these institutions is quite critical. Second point is, it is also unrealistic to expect that all these FPOs will be able to engage with B2C markets in distant markets. So therefore, they need to be part of the value chain. They need to be able to work with private sector players and others, preferably in terms that are mutually possible for them. And it's only possible for a few of these, possibly federated at some level, where they can actually work around other elements of the engagement of the value chain. So we could also look at the primary FPOs, which are highly member-centric, and the secondary FPOs that are more market-facing, that can actually play a larger role in the market chain. And we have large number of existing institutions, the SHGs promoted in many of the NRLMs. And I think there is a possibility of all these trying to be in the next stage of moving away from productivity to livelihoods and markets. To specific things that might be required, and I think this is a learning across the board. First is that while at the central level there's a lot of interest, I think the game is going to be played much more at the state level. The ease of doing business that we often speak of in industry is lacking in the case of FPOs. They still need to run around for lots of licenses. Some of them are still struggling to pay taxes, even though there is a relaxation of taxes and so on. It would help to have an RBI policy guideline to all banks for FPO bank linkage, something similar to what had happened with the SHG bank linkage guidelines. And I think we still have a long way to go in trying to understand what does it take for some of these FPOs to work. A key question that came out of the survey was that we conducted with 55 promoters and other capacity building institutions. The scheme is still not very clear on the kind of support for the existing 8,000 organizations, which are not all of them, but some are ready to go to the next stage. What kind of support is required for that is not necessarily specified. It will be unwise to let go of these institutions that have been built meticulously by many organizations in the field. Yeah, and finally, I think during COVID, there have been many things that have happened. The resilience of the agriculture sector has come out very strongly. And a more interesting thing that has happened because of restrictions, etc., there have been lots of innovations by farmer producer organizations in directly meeting with the customers. There has been a trend towards sustainable consumption where people are looking for safe products. And I think FPOs have an opportunity here to try and move towards providing good quality products for consumers, in some cases directly through their own channels or with other channels. And this connect between the market is something that the farmer was unable to do and losing out. Today, with many of these FPOs, this is indeed a possibility. But to reiterate, I think we still have to work at the creating robust institutions at the grassroots level that can make this trade and the future of farming much more positive. So in some sense, the recent study by Sudha Narayan has showed while the resilience has been very high, from the IFPRI study has shown that farmers' income hasn't quite increased as much, even as consumer prices are beginning to show a signs of increase. So I think that gap is still there. So there's a lot to be done on the ground, and we should not lose sight of that. And I think FPOs could be one of the more important institutions that can enable the increase of farmers' income, which is very much important also post-COVID with more people coming to rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shambhu Prasad. I think that has laid out the state of play fairly clearly as to where we are at this time and where does the hope come from. And that will be the right moment to pass the baton to Mr. Chintala and take his inputs on how do we really build these robust grassroots institutions that Professor Shambhu Prasad is expecting, and then how do you create all the rest of the ecosystem to provide the services to ensure that FPOs are able to function. Yes, not necessarily all of them at the scale and success like Sahyadri, but they should contribute to higher incomes for the farmers. So how do you really translate the intent of the guidelines into a reality? And how do you factor all the state of play that Professor Shambhu Prasad has outlined, which you're obviously very well aware yourself? And therefore, what is it that NABARD is thinking about and how do you plan to go about? And while you're doing it, not only the FPOs, I recall our conversation a couple of weeks back when you mentioned that even many of the existing MACs, you identified some of them can potentially become FPOs. And so there is that agenda as well. So how do you intend translating all this into a reality? Mr. Chintala.
Thank you. Thank you, Shivkumarji. And also good afternoon to everyone looking at this webinar. And I heard Shambhu Prasadji very keenly, and I read that NAPCO report also he has finalized. And so quite a lot of the things he mentioned in that one. But now in the whole of this entire FPO business, probably NABARD is the longest, the oldest player. Though the maybe the concept started somewhere in 2002, I think it gained momentum only in 2011-12, but 14 is the watershed year for the FPOs. When by the time SFSC started doing something, but NABARD had started its own fund called the Produce Fund, and with that we created the FPOs. And today NABARD has 4,000 FPOs promoted by it. And also maybe the whole ecosystem is having close to around 7,000 plus. And they are in various dimensions, various denominations, and various maybe levels of their efficiencies. So now all these things, when we are looking into it, we find that now a time has come to put the whole thing in a different perspective and also proper perspective. I am not saying a different perspective. We have observed, as we are the promoters of most of these FPOs, and also we are the financiers of almost close to around 500 FPOs. NABARD subsidiary, NAB Kisan, is one of the major financiers of the FPOs, and we have lent close to around 500 to 600 crores already to FPOs. So we have seen now over a period of time what are the things that were missing in this entire FPO business, and what could be done maybe to make this one a very a great kind of a people-oriented institution. Now, I can say that it is a people-oriented institution. So in the first place, I will say that maybe both Government of India and NABARD's mandate is equitable development. So if that is the case, everybody in the ecosystem has to have a kind of a stake in the whole of the system. So now, taking that into view, I feel that there is a need to look into what kind of an institution that are available at the ground level, and what kind of a groundswell is needed to make these institutions a very robust one. Now, as we have seen, maybe I have also gone through all the reports that are available in the ecosystem, right, from Azim Premji and a few other reports by somebody else. Everywhere, the basic issue that was done was maybe sometimes some of the FPOs might have come maybe because of the going by that agency. Maybe the local agency might have had some influence or sway over the entire population. So they say that we will go ahead. Now, initially, people might have got enthused, but after some time, they might have thought that they are not getting much of it. So the interest might have got waned. This is what we observed in some of the FPOs. And also, if you look into whole of the 7,000 FPOs that are there in the country right now, their shareholding pattern, or maybe the whatever the shares, contribution they have, is ranging from 1 lakh to 50 lakhs. Now, if you take that 50 lakhs is only something like around 1% of the FPOs are having the 50 lakhs, another 1% are having close to around maybe another, maybe below 50, maybe around 45 lakhs. And most of them maybe close to around 55 to 60% of the FPOs are having less than maybe 5 to 10 lakhs of share capital. So now that itself is a very strange thing that had happened. In case if we consider FPC or FPO as a kind of a corporate, then the share capital mobilization is of the prime importance. And so maybe the agencies which are promoted were not able to put forth this idea so forcefully to the farmers. Otherwise, today in the Indian context, though everybody says that 1,000 rupees is a big amount, but I feel that it is not so big amount. Most of the farmers who are joining this one are having 2, 3 or 5 acres of land, and putting 1,000 rupees is not a big thing. It is the way they get convinced. And if you look into it, there are so many maybe FPOs are having maybe something like 200, 300 people. And even if 300 people are having only 1 lakh share capital, that means they have contributed only 300 or 400 rupees. I think this is untenable to start with. Now, in case if you have to make this as a very big, robust kind of a mechanism, there should be a minimum share capital requirement of 1,000 rupees. And the next one is we have seen now when we are financing quite a lot of them through our subsidiary, and also I have created a rating scale from NABARD side. We have created a rating scale. But now we are giving it to all the banks also as to how these FPOs finance should be done. Today, as Shambhu Prasad ji was telling, that not many FPOs were financed by the banking institution even so far. Either they were unaware, or they were apprehensive, or they were not knowing the contours of this new animal as to how it behaves. So now these 3 issues may be there. So based on our experience, we have devised a rating scale taking into account how the entire FPOs have to be rated. And internally the banks also can do that. So now, from now onwards, in case if we have to make this entire FPOs a very robust kind of organization, what I feel is that we should first maybe take into account the local level institutions that are already there in existence. It may be the water users associations, watershed committees, maybe the self-help groups, joint liability groups, farmers interest groups, or any kind of an organization that are there at the ground level. In case if these organizations where the farmers are also part and parcel of that one are taken into account, probably the institution, the coherence among the members may be very high. Already these people have experienced quite a lot of group dynamic issues and living together or maybe sharing together. So now it's very easy. Otherwise, maybe I can say in the first lot of FPOs, most of them may be the first timers who have come into this kind of a group activity. So that group dynamics was never established. So now, since we have a tremendous experience in the self-help group movement, I can draw lessons from that self-help group. When we started the self-help group movement, we thought that first thing is that is the social mobilization before anything happens. So now that social mobilization itself is a very big issue. Many times, I think in the FPO, when we just go on steamrolling, probably we may be missing that social mobilization. We are thinking that any number of farmers, 1 to 1,000 farmers available in the village will be the FPO. This is not going to work. So in case of SHGs, when we did the social mobilization, there used to be a kind of a rapid test, and we used to do quite a lot of the work. Afterwards, establishing the entire contours as to who are the members who are going to come into this one, and who can gel well with each other, and who can contribute to the common goal and the cause, and who can contribute to that maybe the kitty, whatever they are. And also, once they take the money, also they accept the giant liability also. So now that kind of a liability. So now, in case of these FPOs, if maybe going by whatever now happening, we try to put all these things, but at the same time, the same rigor of that SHGs now has to be reinvented in the FPOs formation also. Then the next one, when we made that SHGs first pilot, maybe when from that startup phase to the pilot phase up to 500, then when we went to make it into a kind of a national level program, what we had done is we started a program called the kickstarting of SHGs movement in the country. So now I think that kind of a kickstarting is required in case of FPOs, where when the kickstarting was done, NABARD had taken that onerous responsibility of calling so many bankers. Between 97 to 2002, we have trained close to 100,000 bankers. Leave alone the NGOs, leave alone the others who are the people who are promoting. So now, this time also, for making this entire thing to be successful, there should be that kind of a kickstarting program for the FPO financing for the bankers. Unless they appreciate, this thing will not move much further. Now, the third thing is with regard to the agencies. Now, who are supposed to do it. Now, in the first phase, we have got that POPIs, that is the promoting agencies, producers are promoting agencies. Basically, they are the local level, well-established NGOs who got a ground connect and who can make the people to come together and also do the things. Now, in this new guidelines, so since the CBBOs have been proposed, now we have to look into it really how the CBBO is going to work as CBBO. In case if it is selected from the Delhi level, it is going to be a disaster. They don't have any kind of a ground level connect. So NABARD from our side as a major implementing agency, we requested the Government of India that CBBO's choice should be left to the implementing agency. And the CBBOs should be at that state level, the implementing agency will try to do. Under the CBBO, probably this POPIs or the resource agencies can be there who got that exact connect with that ground level people. So these people will come. Then this thing will become very easy. Otherwise, if somebody, maybe one agency gets maybe the entire contract, maybe sitting somewhere in Delhi or Bombay, they definitely may not be knowing the geography of the districts in Northeast or maybe the Central India also. So it will be a real recipe for the disaster. So we are asking Government of India that the CBBO choice should be left to the implementing agencies and they should not be, it should not be tampered with. Then the other one which I would like to look into it is with regard to connecting to the corporates. In the initial phase, that is when that 8,000 FPOs have been formed, I think this corporates linkage from the beginning was at a muted space. When I look into it, most of the time the FPOs were formed maybe as a aggregation of the farmers. Afterwards, they started maybe collecting some money. And initially, they started doing only the input aggregation, input kind of a dealership, and afterwards they did it. So now, by the time they even spent maybe close to around 3 or 4 years, they did not get the basics of the business, rather than they were into a kind of a group activity, but not having a much of this thing. So now, this time, since the government of India has now come out with a big program and we cannot make it to fail, so now we have to start connecting the corporates from the day one. So corporates are maybe the one who is going to lift the produce. That is the day one, it has to be there. And also today I wrote an article in the paper. I say that now the entire FPO should be production centric, not the input centric. Now it was very easy. If you look into that previous 8,000 FPOs, maybe substantial number of them on the input centric. Simply they are getting the fertilizer dealership, pesticide dealership, seed dealership, and they are very happy for getting that 1 or 2% of that money, and ultimately so that interest and waned among the members, as this is not going to give a great kind of a mileage. But the COVID had, as told, that had given a new dimension to this entire FPO business, which everybody was not even maybe thinking that really how this FPOs will get scaled up. But during the COVID period, every one of us have experienced, even with the limited kind of a software available to each of them, they have formed their own WhatsApp groups, they have formed their own kind of a thing and started supplying the material to the various RWAs, and they made quite a lot of money. And everybody may not be as big as Sahyadri, but there are so many small people also made maybe 4, 5, 10, 15 lakhs of maybe the money. And in that way, it has enthused them to continue with this kind of operations and do this one. So now this has emboldened, I can say that we are encouraged by this entire success of this FPOs now. They could withstand the rigor and also maybe the kind of a calamity that has come onto this one. And so this business model will definitely work, provided we create a maybe kind of a very robust mechanism as to what are the things to be done. So here I found that some of the things which were missing or maybe which were requirement of these things. Now first thing is, I say that with regard to that share capital, now the number of farmers, now whether 300 is an optimum number, somehow I am doubtful. Though the guidelines says that 300 is the minimum, but 300 minimum, generally the reading of the Indian psychology is, if it is written as 300, we will stop at 300 rather than saying that that is the bare minimum. We say that 300 numbers is more than enough. I think that should not be thing now, that minimum 1,000 members are even beyond. So this is the first part I will say. And second thing which I observed, we are working in aspirational districts. We are working in maybe far-flung areas and all those things. Where in the aspirational districts, rain-fed districts and others, where the agri-produce production or productivity itself is low, even 1,000 members itself is a small number. So there we should have to have maybe more number of people within the same FPO, so that aggregation will be very high, and we will get maybe a sizable market lot so that they can bargain for the better price. So this is the one which I say, so the critical mass of that FPO members is the one which I have my own thing. So I say that it should be minimum 800 to 1,000 numbers always should be there, barring very maybe remote areas that I'm not sure. And even that remote areas also, I feel that why at all that each remote area should have one FPO by its own designation. There can be one FPO maybe covering a vast expanse of land. Even the remote areas, 10, 15 people also can become members of this vast empire. Maybe that can be created as an FPO or a big geography. So it is much easier for them to operate in such kind of a thing. Otherwise, I think the scale will never work. This is the one. And also the next one is with regard to the equity grant. Now equity grant earlier, maybe SFAC used to give some grant, and some other people have got, some did not get, and there is a kind of a discretion was also there. So now this kind of a discretion should not be there. So whenever somebody is coming into this group and they mobilize their share capital, there should be the equity grant, and they say that 15 lakhs is the equity grant maximum. So now whether this 15 lakhs is equivalent to 1:1 or 15 lakhs is having any other ratio, I am not sure. But I feel that the equity grant to this FPO, this fledgling organization, should be at least in the range of around 1:3 to 1:4. As we have experienced in SHGs, whenever they mobilize maybe 1 rupee, they will get 4 rupees as the loan. That is the 1:4 ratio. In case of this one also, to start with, they should get minimum at least at the rate of 1:3 to 1:4 as the equity grant, so that if some FPO mobilizes, maybe 1,000 people mobilizes 10 lakhs, they will get maybe something around 20 lakhs or 30 lakhs as the equity grant. And this will become a sizable amount for them to go to the bank and borrow maybe in the multiples of another maybe 2x, 3x, 5x, depending on their capacity to do this one. Then only they will be able to procure quite a lot of a material, they will be able to process, they will be able to negotiate with the big retailers, everyone, and have holding power and also creating some kind of infrastructure they can do. So my second take is that there should be a kind of equity issues also should be there. Then the next one is the distribution among districts. Now, the Government of India scheme says that every district should have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe any number of these things. So now I say that distribution among districts, every district should have something, but at the same time, it should not be an arithmetical number. That since now the Government of India grant has come, that every district mandatorily will have some kind of a program. Now, wherever it is there, that every block, every district should have maybe first to do that kind of a scoping, and depending on that, this entire FPOs have to be constructed. Otherwise, most of the times it may again dissipate. So this is the one. And the other, now from our experience, now we have, as I told, that we have close to 4,000 FPOs with various denominations. Wherever that FPO has got a great product of its own, even the one single mono product also will click, no doubt about it. We have seen one organization which specializes only in the goat milk. And goat milk, they have become so good and they are very happy and they are making a lot of money, as this product is a niche product and they are able to get the market for that from the Bombay or maybe big cities, and there's a lot of premium into this one. Likewise, maybe some other products also, if somebody is producing a specialized product. But most of the time, the Indian agriculture doesn't have so many specialized products where there is a premium for every kind of a product available. So that FPOs should deal with at least 3 or 4 products, and it should not be mono product. So that one district, one product is maybe I can say it is a futuristic and it cannot be imposed upon immediately, as if you do it, then probably many of the FPOs may get eliminated in this process. So it should be for the future. And now, if for the present, the FPOs should come, they should flourish, they should get the capabilities to do the things, and afterwards, once the products are becoming a kind of uniformity, then they can do this. And the next part of this one is with regard to maybe the milk. Everybody compares Amul milk is the biggest FPO and all those things. So now if you say that the animal, whether it is cow or buffalo, color is immaterial, milk is a milk, and ultimately once you admix it, afterwards nobody can differentiate. But in case of fruits and vegetables, it's not the case. The variety, the geography, everything will make a difference to this one. So now the moment we are going to go for this kind of FPOs, if we want to make a big marketable kind of a lot to get the money, there should be a kind of a prescription for the one single variety to be produced, so that the whole of that lot will get a better price. So now either from the processors or anything. So this also we would like to see. Then the next very important thing which we have seen, that leadership and the managerial abilities. Now, generally we intermix both of them and say that the leadership is better. It is not. Both the leadership, managerial, both are having their own dimensions here. Now, in case of SHG federations or maybe wherever we are having, we say that the SHG women themselves should drive their own organization. So now, the moment they do it, they have absolute control over the nuances of the organization. So the manager is there only to put the accounts in proper shape and maybe go to the market and see the rest of the things to be done. So now here in FPOs, if I look into my all the maybe 8,000 FPOs which we are maybe the entire country is having, leadership was the maybe I can say not properly nurtured. Now there will be some natural leaders, Some organizations might have been running well, but otherwise leadership is not a very big kind of thing. So now we have to do it. And also, one thing which we have seen is wherever the young farmers who are reasonably educated are there in the FPO, those FPOs have become a runaway success across the country. It is not only one place. So now this is one thing which we have to look into it. Just fine, 2 minutes. So which we have to look into it, into this FPOs. So this is there. Then the next problem I will say, process I will say is that business planning. Now, so far, maybe the first generation FPOs, business planning was done, but it was not a very, done in a very systematic way. But now, since the government has come out with this big program and in a very systematic way, we have to go for that business planning right from the beginning. And here I will say that the agencies involved, whether it's called as CBPO, PAPI, RSC, or any kind of thing, they should be there from the day one itself in the business planning and make the entire thing run as per the business plan. And the hand-holding, finally, I will say that before I conclude at this stage, that hand-holding is not a one-time affair. Many times people think that no, just you do for 1 year or 6 months and afterward this fellow will run on its own. It cannot happen. Even the big corporates are not able to predict the green swan or black swan event. So what this poor fellow will predict the event, what is going to happen. So now the hand holding should be continuous. And I will say that even this after 5 years also, there should be a mechanism as to how to keep this kind of a hand-holding agencies with the FPOs, maybe as at a group level, at a federation level, somewhere it has to be there, then only it will work. So maybe the preliminary remarks, I will say that I have a very great faith and maybe the country is going to leap forward with 10,000 FPOs. And also yesterday, we were having a meeting with the Prime Minister on web. I told that the country's requirement is 50,000 FPOs, not 10,000 FPOs. If I look into it, there are close to 7,000 blocks and each block is having 5 to 7 FPOs, means close to around 50,000 FPOs are required. And we have close to around 14 crores of farmers and 50,000 FPOs is still a reasonable number. And now this 10,000 is the first step. And we will look into as to how we will do. From NABARD side, as implementing agency, we are extremely excited to implement this program with full force. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chintala. I think especially for highlighting the scope of learning from self-help groups and strengthening the social capital as part of building more robust grassroots organizations and flagging many issues on the new guidelines, which hopefully when we come to Mr. Swayan, he will deal with some of them. Now, let me turn to Dr. Purve Mehta and request her to pick up another dimension, which is the market linkages. What does it take to build right FPOs who are also oriented towards markets for the economic benefits, while we dealt in some sense with the social side of it in the discussion so far, to make them market ready, how they should be built, and therefore in that context we can talk about the various aspects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shivakumar, and thanks also to Access, Mr. Vipin Sharma, Ram, everyone for organizing this. I think the that we are talking about, the farmer producer organizations or the aggregation of farmers or aggregation of producer. I think it's a very old topic. We've seen this. I think one of the oldest evidences we saw is from West Bengal, where there is an evidence from 1847 where farmers have gotten together and these were mainly around potato farming. So there are a large number, and internationally we've seen a large number of these type of aggregation models, so to say, in agriculture, right? Whether it is the ROPPA, ROPA model in West Africa, where is the Kenyan model, the Embrapa promoted producer organization, which was supported very similar to the NABARD type initiative. So there are a very large number of these models. But in agriculture, of course, there is no such thing as cut and paste. Every country will have to tailor make own strategy. But what are the few very, very common features of the aggregation models across the world? And some of them is, for example, most of the farmer producer organizations like structures that we've seen across the world in developing countries have been promoter driven. Either they have been set up by public sector, or in certain areas such as Thailand and all that, where it went to a slightly advanced form, it was form of a sort of a contract farming model, where it was more like a supply chain management mechanism, right? So promoted by somebody and not self-created is something we have seen consistently everywhere. The second very interesting thing, and Mr. Chintala, you mentioned that very rightly, across the world we see at least 9% of the farmer aggregation models that we've seen are single commodity models. So why we can say across the world that over 85% of the aggregation models in agriculture have been around 11 commodities and not more than that, which is a very interesting angle for an India side, which I would like to highlight little later. The third one, to your point, Mr. Shivakumar, if you see FPO, the farmer producer organizations, which has been successful, the main ones, and when I see successful, I'm not talking from a social perspective, from an economic perspective that has been successful, are very market-oriented ones, right? So typically, if we see about 70% of the cases, there is a buyer. There are farmers who get together to respond to that buyer. And that has been a very, very typical system. And last point, and a common thing that we across the world, is most of them have really struggled. And this is very important lesson for us in India as we set up these large policies, that most of them have really struggled to be self-reliant and self-sustainable. The FPOs across Africa, the FPOs across Asia, which have kind of been successful, are mostly the FPOs who are promoted by the government, for example, or development agencies like ours, for example, or have a very single product which is given by a private sector. So there are very few which are sort of self-done by a farmer and which have been economically self-sustained. These are some very key lessons that we learn from around the world. Within the context of the global experiences, I think in India, the aggregation model has even more importance. As you said, Mr. Chintala, we've had cooperatives, right? We've had self-help groups. These were aggregation models. And so what do we leverage? How do we leverage those experiences for a farmer producer organization? I think one of the biggest lessons that comes is any of the aggregation model, whether the self-help group, India has the largest moment of self-help group through SRLMs, through NRLM and so forth. But they have been very, very oriented towards social well-being and social reforms, and they have played a very, very important role. But if we look at only from a market perspective and making FPOs an economic angle, I think it will need a very different structure and not just 1,200, 1,500 farmers coming together. But I think one of the biggest reason why I personally really support the government's thrust on farmer producer organization, and we have to thank you, Mr. Spine, for taking a leadership on that as well, is what the fundamental one challenge of Indian agriculture today. It is not really the production technologies so much. It is not the question of lack of investments. I mean, we have public sector investing so much. We have private willing to invest so much, and it is not the fundamental problem that many developing country faces, which is the lack of market. I mean, none of these are a challenge for us, right? We have such huge opportunities. I think the fundamental biggest challenge for us is the lack of scale and the lack of economic viability. And aggregation of groups helps that. It kind of, in many ways, changes the definition of what we call as smallholder farm. When we have a smallholder-led system where there is 1.5 hectare of an average land size, essentially what aggregation of farmer producer organization does is, instead of dealing with hectare farmer, are dealing now with 1,200 hectares of farming, and therefore everywhere it will start making sense to the industries who have a larger buyer which is buying for 1,200 hectares, and it will make sense for people who are buying in the market, produce in the market, who rather than somebody bringing 2 bags of produce into the market is now bringing 10 tons for produce in the market. So it is just giving us a larger scale, and I think that is the reason why. Fundamentally, especially for a country like India, it makes an extreme sense. I just wanted to very quickly give a few suggestions to build on what Professor Prasad and Chintala ji has said. Number one is, I think there is a real need for creating some kind of a maturity index to every FPO keeps running till somebody keeps on putting it money in that. I mean, frankly, it is not a very big deal, right? If an organization made of 1,200 people, if somebody every month comes and puts some money, whether it is the government or the developer sector or somebody, of course the organization will run. So there needs to be some kind of a maturity index where we tell that, at this level now, this is a time for us to sort of make these FPO self-sustain and come out of that. So I think that is going to be very important, and Chintala ji, very happy to discuss with you offline, because there are several world models where this has been done. Number two is multiple commodity, and this is very important, especially from an Indian farmer perspective. India's farmer, majority of them, at least 85% of them, do not rely on one commodity. It is a mixed part. And most of our FPOs are very single commodity FPOs, right? So if I am a farmer, say in Bihar, my corn is being traded through an FPO, and I'm getting good income through that, and let's assume that. But corn is not just one commodity that I am depending on for my income. I have livestock, I have vegetables, that sort of thing. So single commodity FPOs are good. They only have, serve a very small piece of the farmer's entire income strata. And therefore, multiple commodities, while we set up the FPOs, how do we trade or how do we deal with multiple commodities, whether it is livestock, crops, all that is going to be very important. I mean, we know that 83% of India's milk does not come from livestock farmer. It comes from farmers who are crop farmers who also happen to keep livestock. So that integrated system in India requires us to deal with multiple commodities through the same FPO structure. Interestingly, and I sit on a couple of boards, including NCDX, where we review the FPO as a business proposition, right? One very interesting thing we see across our FPO ecosystem in India is, frankly, FPOs are an operational unit or a business management unit. They are not a business development unit. So there is a total lack of innovation. There is, it is basically the appetite of most FPOs to try out new things, try out new innovations, try out new commodities is very limited. It is mainly cash in, cash out type business system, which is very similar to what a farmer typically in his or her household would also do. So the FPO's added value will be when it provides one step beyond just buying and selling. So we need to sort of do that, but at the same time with the caveat that not to force fit too many things on an FPO. We've seen this in several, especially public sector led FPO, where when you have 100 farmers, there is a temptation to add too many things. Let's digitize that. Let's do a lot of things. I think just keeping it purely as a business unit and not trying to put too many other layers of social or health related issues and things like that, I think will be very so. As you said, Mr. Chitala, a good distinction between how we operate and how we used to define self-help group versus how do we define FPO is going to be very, very important. And often that line gets blurred. So we need to be very careful of that. And at the end, I'd like to say that, let's look at it from a farmer's perspective, right? What is the added advantage that I, as a farmer, get by being in a FPO or by operating on my own? The moment we are able to answer that question, I think we will be able to do a better job of setting up our FPOs, which would make sense for private sector to come and plug and play, because we are giving them a larger scale to operate on, but at the same time for the public sector as a very important economic unit where the policies can start implementing. And one of the key needs for that also is aggregation. In terms of the FPOs are often working in real silos. There needs to be a good integration between the FPOs, which will become more like an FPO platform type. Very much, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta, and not only for the various insights, but I think bringing to the core issue of, in some sense, the raison d'etre of why FPO will make a difference to me as a farmer. While at a broad level, we know it's aggregation. It needs to be local in every context, and then only rest of the things will go through that. Thanks for articulating that. Now let me turn to Mr. Swain and request him, as part of his remarks, also deal with the various questions that the earlier three panelists have raised in terms of how do we align states in addition to the work that Center has been doing, so that all the required support to FPOs get accelerated. How do we deal with the issues of tax and compliance related penalties that are imposed, under capacity in the early nascent stage kind of FPOs also, and dealing with some of the other questions with respect to multi-commodity versus one district, one product kind of perspective that is brought in the guidelines, the minimum membership issue. There are demands for smaller numbers and the larger numbers from different stakeholders, and the role of CBBOs. I think a number of things have been brought out by the panelists. I think as part of your remarks, can I request you also to respond to some of these as to what next from a government perspective in pursuing this agenda? Mr. Swain.
Thank you, Sivakumar sir. It's my pleasure to be here, and I first of all extend my thanks to the Access for inviting me to this forum. And as they said, it's more than 1,300 participants. I welcome each of them. I thank them for being with us today for such a subject, which is very core to, very close to my heart, and giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. And certainly, the distinguished panelist, Mr. Chintala, he has put before me a bouquet of demands, bouquet of questions. It probably reflects the varied mosaic of the democracy. The demands are unending. And definitely, Dr. Purbi has also spoken about a very good aspect of it. And so also Samur. But if you allow me to just give a context, allow me to speak little, just not FPO, but contextualize the entire FPO, then I'll take a little more time, because having designed this scheme and prior to that having developed the two ordinances which probably are part of the Atmanirbhar scheme, So obviously, I'd like to give a kind of contextual this thing. Please bear with me. I'll also attend whatever issues have been raised on the way by all the panelists. If you have a journey from our independence, from a deficit today, almost 295 million metric ton of food grains and 350 million ton of fruits and vegetables. India is definitely the second largest food grains and fruits and vegetables. So that shows how we have moved. That is from shortage to surplus. So it is the technology, the research, the coordination, and our own farmers' own skill and their own toil and labor has helped us to become this surplus. They are the food giver of the nation. So that is why today, when I start, I salute the Jawans who have ensured our protection in the border. Today we can sleep because of them. Salute them, Jai Jawan. And salute the Kisan because they are ensuring we get the food that we need in every household. Jai Kisan. Having said this, all these things have happened with whether it is productivity improvement, production improvement. What has happened is this surplus thing has improved the marketable surplus with each of the farmer. Consequently, the farmer has more to sell today. Even if the land size is reducing, he has more to sell today. Consequently, the market is getting flooded with agricultural commodities. So obviously, the supply and demand situation needs to be looked into when the price is to be ensured to the farmer. Very clear. If you look at the USA, you have the individual landholding size of about 180 hectares. And where is India? It is about, as they say, it is about 1.06 hectares. That was 2011. And European Union, if you see, it is almost 50 plus. That means that is a scale given. I mean, if it is 180 farmers, Indian farmers, equivalent to land in terms of USA. So productivity in USA is much more because of the aggregation of those land per farm. But nonetheless, how do you achieve that aggregation? What the USA individual farmers are able to do. The individual farmers are not only very educated if you interact with them, if you interact with, say, Californian farmers, where almost 400 hectares is the norm there. So, per farming. So, the farmers themselves are very educated and the use of implements is of very high level. The market orientation to production, which is probably very rare in India, is almost aligned. Production is aligned to the market. The harvest is aligned to the market demand. So that is why there is a staggered harvest and staggered supply to the market. So that is why individual farmers are able to showcase their own produce by their own brand name in this in the entire supermarket. But what happens in India? The economy of scale, which Shiv Kumar started in his own opening remarks. So with 1 hectare of land at least, we need to aggregate them around the produce because we need a scale of produce so that this strength arises in that. But that is a challenging task, definitely. So obviously, why are we attempting it? We need the income of the farmers to increase. Today, nearly 16+% of the GDP is coming from the farming community. So nearly 55% plus are dependent on the agriculture today. So if so much a percentage of population is large percentage of population is dependent and still giving a double-digit contribution to GDP, unlike the Western countries. So obviously, government has to do, nation has to do, every individual has to do for the farmers. So that is why the doubling of farmers' income, which was the clarion call given by the Honorable Prime Minister in 2016. So that is definitely the 7-point strategy. If you look at that, marketing has been in the forefront. Market improvement in the marketing structure and improvement in the processing has been two prime components in that. And along with that, definitely there was a move to reduce the cost of production while improving the productivity. That was a wholesome 7-point strategy which was given to the nation. And then came the COVID, when I was working towards opening of this from 25th of March, all these 2,500 major markets which are closed down, of the 6,900 APMC markets that I have in the country. So plus this thing. So when I'm working towards this, I realized the strength of FPO. Because when I was working with these markets, I realized that unless you liberalize this entire ecosystem of the marketing and bring in the FPO, that is going to be quite difficult. So very quickly, I had to contact the FPOs to move them to the cities to distribute the. When I was opening up the markets, I asked them, requested them to come with a van and distribute that the fruits and vegetable. And I realized that that's one force which could do it in major cities. So thanks to them, so that's us. That FPO, the strength lies, that is the supply can really match the demand even in the most adverse conditions. So when we are working towards this, we opened up for the direct marketing ecosystem 4th April. We gave a kind of request to all the states to reduce the licensing barrier to the direct marketing so that the industries can move in and the farmers can join hand directly with the industry for the procurement entire buying system, so that at least we are that time at the COVID situation, we are round the corner with the harvest. The Rabi harvest was round the corner and we had to open up the market. When you realize that, when we are pushing the states, we realize that we need to do more. Then came the Atmanirbhar Bharat of May 15th. If you remember that third trans of Atmanirbhar Bharat, that there are two ordinances which are hinted out in those two, in the third trans of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So where we had to work on that, the farmers trade and commerce promotion and facilitation ordinance 2020, which I really worked hard to get it on the ground. And the other, of course, was the farmers empowerment and protection, price assurance and quality 2020, which is almost equivalent to contract farming. Those are the two central legislations we provided for. Along with that came a 1 lakh crore agriculture infrastructure fund. Only ordinance will not do. The reason for opening up the ordinance was that we have to open up beyond the APMC by limiting the regulation of APMC to within the APMC market and open up the trade area, defining a distinctly trade area where both FPO and the agriculture cooperative societies, apart from the other individual farmers and the corporate, can have a fair play. So the regulations were liberalized to bring in a kind of system for making a barrier-free interstate and intrastate trade. That was a central legislation that we want. If you look at the Farmers Trade and Commerce Ordinance, the FPO plays a very, very significant role both in terms of buyers. FPO can be a seller like any farmer, because APMC Act provides for FPO to be at par with the farmer. That's a seller. But here we first time recognize them as a major buyer without a PAN requirement. And for the electronic trade and transaction portal platform, we also brought in FPO to play a fair, major role in that, bringing up, if they want, we can bring up a electronic trade and transaction platform. And we defined a separate, we also brought out a separate payment policy for the FPO. So given this, while working this FPO scheme, we are actually as working like, of course, Shiv Kumar Saab very lightly said, I burned midnight. Yes, I did burn midnight for almost more than 6 months to do research on this FPO as to where we stand and where we should, and what we should do and where we should go. In fact, we looked at the entire world global ecosystem as to what is happening. We looked inside internally within India. That is what NABARD is doing, what SFSC is doing. NABARD is that time like 4,000 plus they have done. So and also SFSC almost 900 plus FPOs they have done. Ministry of Rural Development under the Deen Dayal Antyodaya scheme, NRLM, they have done almost 169 FTCs. And if you look at also, like of course, Chintala Sahab spoke about the history of the FPO when it picked up gradually. So 2013 onwards, when a new policy was given, SFSC became active. If you look at even before that, Maharashtra, under the Maharashtra Agriculture Competitiveness Project, that was the World Bank aided project, it created almost after 2014, 406 FPOs. Prior to that, about 6 FPOs, and from 2014 onwards till 2018, we created 406. And we looked into all these FPOs, all these kinds of FPOs, their way of bringing up, their culture, their governance, their business model, everything, and what is the hand-holding pattern. So we realized there are certain internal issues which is actually plaguing our FPO system, which probably Dr. Sambhu Prasad also spoke about that what is the survivability of these FPOs? Certainly, there are the issues of relationship, that was interdependence within the organization, like what is the social capital within that, even the institution that they are operating, and what kind of institution they have, what is the rules and regulations, what kind of structure they have, and what is the principle of justice, equity within the organization which they have, even the production process, collective production process, how they have done, and the marketing, because asset is a major issue which you realize that without asset, they are suffering the asset deficit, majority of them, that needs to be done. Even the organizational design was a major issue, governance of the structure. Then the access to technology was one more issue I could really, convince myself needs to be addressed in this. The financial strength, which needs to be brought in, if they have to do that with a kind of proper business plan. So, given this, we realize that these weaknesses are actually plaguing across that. Like I was said that about 7,000 FPO, I said it's about 6,000 plus FPOs. So these are to some extent, it is plaguing some majority of the FPOs. But then the FPOs who have set right all this, they don't depend on the government help, government resources. Like Sahadri, somebody spoke about. Certainly, they have come up of their own. They don't need a government support. They don't need a government handholding. They have never taken a government handholding. They have gone up. There are similarly various types of FPOs are there. They have come up without any government support. Salute to them. It is by the farmers, for the farmers, and entirely management by them. So if it is self-reliant, then they can come up. Only government will serve as a kind of medium to that. But then, however, keeping in mind the entire ecosystem of India, we have to ensure that this throughout India we need to bring up, because if we have to give a kind of regional balance to this entire system, because we are endowed with various agroclimatic system. So obviously there are productive systems in India which needs to be harnessed. So that is why this scheme was brought out entirely. Let me just tell you about the salient points, a few of the salient points. So while planning this, I had consulted all the academics, researchers, action researchers, the CEOs, the farmers, farmer lobbies, the marketing companies who are involved in this entire FPO process, and various bodies also. Like this is a question which has been asked. Like if the SFPC is doing 800 to 1,000 membership, and if NABARD is doing about 250 to 300 membership of the FPOs, and similarly this NRLM is doing about 350 plus. Now they have even gone to more higher. So the question is, what should be the minimum number? That's a question which is there. We are calculating, because that question has been raised by Mr. Chintara. Then I went into basically what should be the kind of economy of scale. Even we have got about 7,000 blocks, and since we have got about like every panchayat will have about 2 to 3 villages with about 300, 350 farm holdings in a panchayat. So what should be that should be enough to start with. So when we did a calculation about the produce volume aggregation, we realized that let us fix it in the plain area about 300. That's a minimum to get the company. They can register either we have given it in Companies Act or on the State Cooperative Act, because both the corporate, there are others. NABARD has formed under the Trust Act. They have also formed under the Registered Society Act, which we have limited ourselves to do. That is the Cooperative Societies Act and the Companies Act, because then the dividend distribution is possible through this when we are ensuring the cooperative federalism and also ensuring single member, single board, despite number of shareholding. So that's a cooperative federalism can be brought in very clearly. If while doing that, we certainly looking into that the produce which is there, 300, that means roughly about that size, which will be having a kind of mass where the bargaining power of these people can improve. So that is where I've said 300 in the plain area and 100 in the hilly and northeast area. So there could be demand for 50 or 150. We looked at it. The smaller the FPO, the survivability is challengeable. Even at 300, the survivability issues are there with the NABARD. Huge issues with NABARD. Whereas the survivability issues improves, I've seen outside the production producer organizations in European countries, when they have reduced the number, even if it's a higher number of sizes, I mean land holding sizes, they have reduced the number of membership. Survivability has been questionable because of the internal, I mean, intensive competition in the marketplace. So they have to scale up their produce. So that is why if you reduce it, the survivability issue comes. If you increase it, then the question is how big you can go. So you have to balance it to access. So the question is Chintala Sahab raised with it, actually they may not go forward beyond 300. Let me assure you, because we have while doing it, we have given the equity grant which is up to 15 lakh. And that issue is 2,000 per member. If a member is 50, it's a matching equity grant. The 1,000 will give 1,000. And if he's giving 1,000, I mean 200, I mean if he's giving 2,000, will also contribute 2,000. So maximum to 2,000. They may contribute more than 2,000, up to 10% of the total equity holding of the entire company. So, but then ours will be limited to 2,000 per member to 15 lakh. And the question is whether 15 lakh is good enough. Let me also combine with the credit guarantee. It is basically the guarantee that we provide for collateral-free loan up to 2 crore. So that together improves, because if you look at the study which was made by the Price Waterhouse Commission, I mean PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in the MSCP project 2018 report is there very clearly. One of the major issues they had pointed out is the financial strength which they need to have, the credit access and the financial strength. In fact, average size of loan was 40 lakh. But then what we did is we have gone up to 2 crore, so that with a collateral free, so with 15 lakh of equity, matching equity, that means 750 is the member. So they'll never stop at 300. They stop at 300. The total equity will then be 6 lakhs from our side, not the 15 lakh. So that is the incentive to go on. So we have designed that way so that we move towards a higher level. And we have also provided for, if you look at my guideline that I have drafted, I have provided for the federating at the district level, at the state level. I am not stopping at that which the federation Dr. Samur Prasad spoke about, because we realize that there are GI products, there are also your organic products. We need to take it up because India is coming up in the organic space. We need to build up the FPOs in the organic space under our scheme. Even the GI products, because we have a host of GI products which are there, whether it is Tripura Queen Pineapple or it is Basmati rice or anything. So we need to build up. So that is why federating is very important. So that is why if you look at that event, we have said that the federations, when they are federating, they can also get a kind of credit guarantee facility access to my credit guarantee fund, which is, of course, Rupala Saab will be administering that. So handling this credit guarantee fund and also NCDC. So definitely there is a incentive to federate, to scale up. So that is what the scaling, because we need to improve processing, branding, and also internationally you have to position ourselves in the export. We have a very ambitious program of doubling our export from $30 billion in now to $60 billion in 2022, like doubling of farmers' income by 2022. How do you achieve? FPO is definitely one of the means we are positioning in that entirely. So along with this, while doing this, we have definitely one of the issues we are looking at the produce cluster. I have already said produce clusters will be identified. They are in the identification. The question that Sivakumar raised, and in fact it has been raised, how much is the state to play? If you see in the monitoring system, I have given the three monitoring structure at the state level, central level, state level, and the district level, district monitoring committee. One of the role that I have defined for district monitoring committee, which is to be headed by either the district collector or CEO Jila Parishad, is that help in the identification of the cluster. So that committee comprising of the state officers, also represented by NABARD, also by the KVK and the SAUs. So they will be identifying the clusters in that district, produce clusters. So definitely there is a major role to play. Of course, state government can also give their scheme support. There is a provision in that. So, but then the major role will be played in identifying that and monitoring the health of the FPOs. Second is, since this district committee always is looking at the district banking committee coordination committee, which is which is chaired by the district collector. Then our credit guarantee fund, which is a major challenge, credit intake to the FPO is a major challenge. So far, we have seen through NABARD FPO, SFC FPO, or the NRLM FPO, or any other FPO. So that also will be money for the district committee very clearly. So that will be there. So while doing it, the aspirational districts definitely needs to be brought up. If you bring up the aspirational districts in India, total India's quotient will also improve substantially. We need to improve that. So at least we are looking at this 112 aspirational districts of the 115 where we need to put it very clearly, and one FPO in each block. Every block of the aspirational districts have to have equitable justice and development that we are looking at. While doing it, also we are looking at the one district, one product. The question is, Chintala Sahab raised why this one district, one product. I'll add to this, one district, one focus product, which you are working now district-wise to identify in the country. Because if you look back at the history of this ODA, I'll say, if you look at Japan, 1979 itself, this one village, one product came. That is as a part of the regional economic development plan, where the local produce, the local people can develop the local produce and take pride in that from local to the international. That was the chain they used to look at. So how have the Japan has this, and this has been followed up by the ASEAN region. If you look at it, don't go anywhere else. If you look at even within ASEAN region, if you look at Thailand, you must have heard about UTAP, one Tambo, one product. Tambo is something like a lesser than one township or one subdivision. So if you look at Philippines, it is one town, one product. If you look at Indonesia, also we have got one village, one product. So you don't have to look at Europe or USA. China has combination of all this. The question is that if you have to go, you have to develop your processing, branding, and ensure that the local community participation is in place in a very, and they take pride in that. While community participation, the product that a particular region, whether it is district level or village level, had to be brought up as an entity. So that we can connect the international market even if it is required. So if it is possible, Tripura's queen apple can be exported very easily. So we can develop the entire value chain across this. Supply chain entirely can be brought up with these federations and other things very clearly. So given this, our system definitely, and one more issue, these FPOs which are there, we have divided the entire scheme into 3 phases, that is nascent phase and growth stage and the maturity phase of the FPO. This 5 years and 3 years, I have divided the entire support system into 2 different distinct time zones. One is the 3 years when we are giving the direct financial support to the FPOs. That is basically support for the salary to the CEO and the accountant of the FPO. If you look at my guideline, you will see that very clearly. Apart from that, the establishment cost also we are supporting. We have a limit placed because if the FPO is spending more than that, they'll have to pull it out from their own resources. Then also registration charges. And the CBPO that we spoke about, that's the professional agency with the 5 different professionals. That is including a social mobilization professional is there. Apart from a production professional, social mobilization professional, marketing professional, legal and accounting, because the compliance had to be handled, because we realized this, they are suffering from a lot of these compliances, particularly Part 9A of the Companies Act 2013, which is supposed to be on the company managed by the farmers and a cooperative federalism under the Companies Act by the farmers, but still there is a huge compliance issue. So to do that handholding, the CBPO will have a expert in legal and accounting to handle that compliance issues for 5 years. But then we are not stopping at that. We have also provided a very intensive skill development. Skill building of the FPO is very important. So it will be at the 2 levels. One by the CBPO in the initial level, including field visits. Second is very, very professional training and skill building through 2 national nodal training institutes that we have identified. One is the BARD of NABARD under Dr. Chintala, and the other is, of course, the line at Gurgaon under the NCDC. NCDC is our implementing is also NABARD as well as FSS. So there are 2. They'll be collaborating with other national level institutions, including Professor Sambhu Prasad's IRMA. That is also I have mentioned in that guideline. So they can do that. It is for these national institutions, through nodal institutions do it. The state agriculture universities and KVKs. So that the training will be organized on the organizational management, accounting, agriculture, marketing, processing, brand building, and all these compliance issues, everything. So there will be a training calendar for these FPOs, and they'll be trained in this to have that. Even this e-learning modules will be there. diploma programs will be brought out in this. So given this, the skill development finds a very important place in our entire ecosystem of the FPO building. But one major issue that we focus, which is missing from all these FPO buildings so far, was the business plan. We realized that some of the agencies like Maharashtra Agriculture Competitiveness Project, under that and under SFSC, they had a second level of expert body to develop this business plan. When the first level of the professional agency just built up in 3 years, they engaged another level of agency to build up the, and wherever the business plan has been built up and it is successful, the FPOs have gone up. So we have built up this business plan with our entire system, which will be working out, as Chintalasa was asking whether or not, why not from the beginning? Yes, beginning, of course, the business plan cannot be done unless we aggregate. If you see the CBBO, they have to do a baseline survey to find out the gap and the possibility of the FPO formations around the product. And then of course, they'll be, when they're aggregating and registering, at this certain time, equity injection has to be there and the credit guarantee has to be there. So the business plan, which will be built up over a period of time, say from second year onwards, the business plan till 5th year, that can be implemented. That will, CBPO will help them to implement that solidly, so that the market linkages will be there, the processing will be there, asset building will be there, appropriate assets building to that business plan will be there. All these things will be reflected in the business plan. And it will not just be under one commodity. Remember, the success of the FPO depends on how much seasonality they are covering, so that the association gets deeper. So that is why it is just not around one product that they are building. They have already mentioned about it has to be a combination of products, so that the seasonality of the association improves, seasonality of the marketing improves. So that is why this FPOs, what we have given is, after analysis, good analysis of the entire thing, we have already given this 10,000, but then these are the new FPOs that is to be created for the entire institutional structure that we have spoken about. But there are two more systems that we have injected into this entire effort. That is by the corporate bodies, the processing bodies. If they want to also promote the FPOs, that is a beautiful avenue for them. That is a support system for them. I think Sivakumar Saab also will agree to this. And in addition to this, we have also provided avenues to the existing FPOs who are not yet, we have already come, but probably they have yet to come up. So for them also, we have provided some hopes in that guideline. So if you look at it, FPO, it is just we have already had a good beginning. I'll say salute to NABARD, salute to SFSC, salute to Ministry of Rural Development, salute to Maharashtra, salute to Tamil Nadu, which has done more than 150 FPOs. And certainly, we don't have to look at Europe, where Sweden, you see the 40% of fruits and vegetables is by through the producer organizations. If you look at Italy, if you look at Ireland or Ukraine, the producers organizations have basically cooperative dominated, cooperative sectors. But in India, what you are looking at, which Chintala Saab may agree, definitely, the company sector, we are providing for, we are also be growing up the FPO in the cooperative sector, but we are also looking at that cooperative federalism under the companies, under the Part 9 of the Companies Act, where the interference will be reduced, where the farmers will manage their freight, manage their organization, manage their business, and there will be a market linkage definitely. We are looking forward to this for the future. So thank you definitely. And in the Atmanirbhar Bharat, definitely, this FPO are going to play a very important role. In ENAM, if I may tell you, during COVID period, I saw when I learned that new module of the ENAM, that is FPO module, I now see the FPOs doing the trade from their own collection centers in the ENAM without coming to the APMC. I'm sure these FPOs are going to set the trend in India. And if 10,000 FPOs at the beginning, the hope and aspirations of the NABARD chairman that 50,000, it should not be a distant reality. When he finishes up this 10,000, the next target will definitely be the 50,000. Have a patience. India is great, and it is Jai Jawan and Jai Kisan again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swain, and thanks also for responding to the various issues have already been raised by the other panelists, each of them specifically. While I have a number of questions from the participants, I note that most of them actually have been dealt in the various comments by different people. But I'll just take this time, say we already run out of time. I'll ask one question each of the other three panelists now, and thereafter we'll wind up, and I'll request the responses to be also short, of a minute or two at the most. Now, let me ask Dr. Mehta that of the various insight that you have provided to make successful FPOs, also linked to the market and so on, can I ask you what your perspective on is the role of digital technologies and the mobile connectivity that is now available, how they'll play a role in accelerating the more successful FPOs going forward?
Thank you. I think, there was a very interesting survey that says about, of course, we all know that about 85% of India's farming households, not individuals, households, have access to digital technology. But if you sort of double click on that, and if you look at the FPO membership, over 90% of FPO members have to an IT technology. So I think, how do we leverage that both from a production input supply side, but more towards connecting them to the markets? What are the larger opportunities? Say, for example, the futures market. Just like an individual farmer, the FPO members also are, the decision on what crop to grow is based on the past market experience, not the future market experience, right? And so how do we change that? How do we bring that? So futures market, for example, credit flow that was discussed by most of the panelists, some of those areas where they can play. But one of the very key point where digital technology and FPOs can play a role is FPO making additional business support by lending more technology. For example, we have the shared tractor model, the Uberization of tractor, for example. Why can't an FPO become a unit that owns the tractor, which is happening now in a couple of FPOs we've seen in Madhya Pradesh and so forth, and lends it to not just 1,200, 1,500 member farmers, but rest of it. So very large, but especially into market linkages, I think it can play a very, very important role. And my last point on that would also be in monitoring FPOs, because I think we need a proper monitoring, like a dashboard, to constantly monitor what is the value that.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Professor Shambhu Prasad, you also brought up in terms of the importance of federations and getting to scale, while the local units of FPOs can remain smaller for member centricity aspects, and the whole aspect of scale has been brought in by others as well. So what do you think are the design principles of such federations? If we have to be member-centric, drawing some lessons from, of course, the big federations and otherwise, what should be the design principles of a federation?
Yeah, so I think the thinking that's emerging is that these primary FPOs, what we learned from the milk case is that the interface is almost on a daily basis. Agriculture being seasonal, restricting yourself to one commodity means that you're not having this interface with members throughout. So I think the primary task of the primary FPOs is to ensure this, some sort of a connect all the time. It could even be a place where the primary FPOs are seen as agents for government schemes, so that this connect is done much better. And the secondary FPOs work on the market level. And this aggregation, earlier again, what we are realizing, some of the state level federations that were set up few years back, they need to be invested in somewhat differently, because they potentially have the ability to go up the value chain, invest in infrastructure. And they find that sometimes they have to work across commodities. They may not work with all their members, but they work more with what the market logic is around. So I think there is a possibility here, but the key thing across is to try and bring the understanding that we've had with regard to the startup ecosystem into the FPO ecosystem. I think that shift has not quite occurred. The kind of investments that we are talking of in the startup ecosystem, the innovation risk capability that is being given to these startups to try and go to the next stage, we are not finding enough of that in the FPO ecosystem. So I would have liked to see some risk capital as well provided to these, having met a few of these benchmarks, and particularly so at the federation, because they have to play a much bigger role.
Great point, thank you. Now, lastly to Mr. Chintala, I think while focusing so much on FPO capacity building, are we in some sense not giving sufficient attention to building the capacity of the POPIs, CBBOs, because they in turn will really have to handle the FPOs. So is that more important at this phase of our evolution? And then what are the NABARD's plans in this regard?
Yeah, NABARD now, as Swain Sir was telling, that maybe a detailed maybe capacity building measures have been designed, and we are having maybe our BIRD and also LINAC and also NIAM, so many other institutes also with. As you rightly told that now, when I look into the CBBOs, now most of the CBBOs are maybe the new organizations probably that may be coming, and with an aggregation of maybe 4 or 5 special experts who will be brought into this one. So now they may be experts in their own area, but maybe they have to be guided in this particular nuances of this FPO and maybe the guiding principles of this FPO, how these things are to be done. So there is a requirement of maybe giving the capacity building initiatives to the CBBOs. To the POPIs, we have seen, as CBBOs is a new concept, but POPIs we have seen in the previous avatar. They need to, though they are all very good, maybe with regard to the social mobilization, maybe organizing people, putting the things together, giving the expert advice. But at the same time, these FPOs are not the real sense, not self-help groups. There you are dealing with a maybe just very small kind of a savings and maybe linking to the banks. But here you are creating a business entity of the farmers, and this business entity has to be guided properly. So the capacity building of POPIs and these CBBOs are very important. And also I would stress one more thing, that the managers now who are, as I told, that maybe there is a kind of a maybe the governance and also the management. So in that kind of a thing, the managers whom we are going to take, mostly they may be the fresh MBAs or MCOMs or anybody. They may not be having the same kind of a maybe attitude or maybe the orientation towards running the FPO. So now we have seen BIRD has conducted a certificate course in the past 3 years, and wherever these managers have gone and maybe did the certification course of 3 months, there was a dramatic improvement of the organizational performance, as they could understand maybe the entire fundamentals of this running the organization. So I feel that the training should be at the manager level, training should be at the POPI level, training should be at the CBBO level, and very importantly, as we have experimented with the cooperatives, training should be for the governing body of the FPOs, who are basically the farmers, maybe the progressive farmers. We have seen in cooperatives, wherever we have given the capacity building to the directors of the primary societies or the DCCBs, their performance have gone so high when compared to the one who was not trained. So now capacity building is one of the most critical input into this one, and we are all gearing up. Modules have been prepared, and to answer that Purvi madam's thing that you asked, whether that JAM, maybe the mobile is going to help. Now we are creating online training programs, and that can be viewed even on the mobile or maybe the tab. So now that kind of a thing also will help the farmers who need not travel to such a distance, but at the same time maybe just open their entire mobile and see on the YouTube or maybe any other kind of a format which we devise. And it's very easy. We want to create this training modules in all local languages with the more of the visuals, maybe almost like the point by point way of doing the things. So these are the things which we are trying to look into.
Thank you, Mr. Chintala. So with that, let me close out by sharing 3 takeaways for me. I'll not call it a summary. I think the subject has been dealt with fairly comprehensively over the last 90 odd minutes. But 3 takeaways for me. I thought I'll share with all the participants. Firstly, not see all FPOs as one type. Because when you talk about whether 7,000 FPOs or 10,000 FPOs or 50,000 FPOs, I think we are putting all FPOs under one bucket. Let's not see all of them as one, but there will be several classes, and based these different classes, we need to create fairly differentiated ecosystem to support them. And that classification, as came out in the discussion today, needs to be on two aspects. One is the business or service portfolio of the FPOs. There are different kinds of business or services that various FPOs are conducting. And second is the level of maturity that the FPOs are in. So as some kind of a matrix of the portfolio of business and service and the level of maturity, we look at classifying all the FPOs and then creating rest of the ecosystem services to support them differentially. I think that is one important takeaway, because it's been a long time that we spent already on for several years. There are different FPOs at different levels. So that is one takeaway. The second is the importance of building the social capital and governance capacity before expecting significant economic upscaling, because otherwise the expectations would be very different both on part of members as well as all the other stakeholders. So more successful organizations, one of course see as to why are we coming together, but once that why are we coming together translates also into a social capital and a governance capacity. And included in this obviously are the various other nuances that already been brought out in terms of the leadership and managerial and many of these kind of areas. So building these and strengthening these as essential predeterminants for economic success. So I think that is the second takeaway that I'll share with you. And lastly, the role of organizations providing shared services to FPOs. Many different things have been brought out today. I'm pulling them together as organizations providing shared services, whether it is in the form of federations, whether it is in the form of POPIs or CBBOs. Any of these nature of entities are essentially trying to provide, rather than internalizing and expecting the small FPOs to do everything. The support system has to provide all these capabilities, whether it is in terms of ability to access all the schemes and benefits from the state and center, whether it is linkages with the financial institutions, whether it is linkage with the markets, whether it is access to shared IT infrastructure, and whether it is Uberizing services. So there are many different possibilities. And therefore, we look at them as multi-layered. One aspect we talked about different types of FPOs. Here we now are talking about different layers, and not just as one FPO as an entity, but FPOs and supporting ecosystem, so that the shared services are made available to FPOs from outside of FPOs to equip them and make them more successful. So I thought I'll share these three takeaways that I had. And with that, I thank all the panelists, Mr. Swain, Mr. Chintala, Dr. Mehta, and Professor Shambhu Prasad, for a very comprehensive painting of the various issues involved and potential solutions that are there, and how do we take all the intent of the government in creating many of the new guidelines and the other reforms and funds forward for the benefit of the farmer and the other stakeholder. And let me also join all other panelists in thanking Access for providing this platform, and with very short notice, reaching out to all of you, the participants, and I thank all of you also in joining and sending various questions both beforehand that were factored into the various talking points, as well as the other questions that came in. And with that, let me conclude with thanks to everyone.
Thank you.